What is going on right now in Pittsburgh? Over the past 3 days, Pat Narduzzi has absolutely been cleaning up in recruiting.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, host of Locked On Canes, co-host here of Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs will be hopping in a little bit, and today's episode is proudly brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On this loaded Locked On ACC, we'll talk about the top rivalries in the conference as we are, I think, 82 days away from actual college football being played. We'll talk about the impact of the House versus NCAA settlement, which was officially approved on Friday. But we got to talk about Pitt cleaning up and recruiting right now. So let's bring in the man that I refer to as the recruiting overlord. He is the host of The Portal here on Locked On. He's also the host of Locked On Seminoles. Brian Smith is with us. You alerted me to this, Brian. Since June 6th, 3 days ago, the Pitt Panthers have landed 10 verbal commits in 3 days. Is there something in the water there in Pitt right now?
I just think that Pat Narduzzi is the obvious recruiting genius that we just didn't know about. That's what this is, Alex. No, he's the antithesis of what you would think of as a recruiter. He's about as soft as a porcupine, but 10 commitments in 3 days is just insane. So I just want to state tip of the cap to everybody involved at Pitt. I don't care where you're recruiting. 10 in 3 days is one of the biggest recruiting heaters I've ever seen. So, and here's the thing, like they've got a couple of kids from Texas, they got Georgia, they got Florida, they got Virginia, and they got some in-state kids too. But Pittsburgh doesn't normally recruit nationally. They've changed something. I just learned of this morning. Like when I added it up, I kept seeing Pitt like on the commitment list. But when you look at it, like Rivals, the way they do it, they've got all their numbers based on the date the kids commit. I'm like, holy moly, 10 guys? Look, you can say whatever you want. Oh, they're not recruiting all elite kids. There's some pretty talented players in there. Jaden Dunbar is a kid that I know. He plays at Thomas County Central. He's a 6'5" wide receiver, has a tremendous amount of talent. It's another kid Florida State has missed on. Don't get me started on that. But they also got Isaiah Williams, a linebacker out of Virginia that's a very talented guy that's a speedy player. He will fit Narduzzi's defense very well. And again, they got kids from all over. They got a kid from the Houston area, a kid from Baltimore. This is pretty impressive. So I'm not saying Pittsburgh's going to be a top 5 team in a couple of years, but when you do this kind of stuff, it makes me wonder if you've changed enough to elevate your program. And again, congrats to Narduzzi and his staff.
Yeah, for those who are watching the video version right now, I'm sharing my screen with their rivals.com page. And yeah, since the 6th of June, they've landed 3-star defensive tackle Lincoln Hoke, unrated offensive lineman John Curran, 3-star edge rusher Reston Lehman, 3-star DB Kentrail McCray from Clearwater, Florida. You talk about national recruiting. 3-star linebacker Isaiah Simmons, a couple of unrated guys, tight end and wide receiver Wyatt Villarreal and Jaden Dunbar, who you mentioned. 3-star offensive lineman Mike Vanderrood, unrated offensive lineman Nicholas Howard, and athlete Damon Ferguson out of Baltimore, 3-star player. So, yeah, you talk about the recruiting heater, Brian, and the importance of national recruiting. And, like, you know, Pitt has been hanging around. They had a bizarre season last year. You want to talk about streaky. They won their first 6. So for half of the season, Pitt was mathematically an ACC championship contender, and then they went on to lose their next 7, including the bowl game, to end the year. But obviously, when you're talking about a Narduzzi team You're always going to be strong on the defensive side of the football. They had a great linebacker core last year that was referred to as the Sharks. They had a nickname, forced a lot of turnovers earlier in the season. Do you think Pitt could maybe, obviously the players we're talking about right now, the recruits are not going to be on the team this coming season, but do you think Pitt could be maybe a dark horse in the ACC this year?
Well, you've got a returning starting quarterback, and as you noted, their defense, they're always going to be a really big pain to deal with because they come up with so many different ways to pressure the signal caller. And anytime your quarterback's under duress, we'll see. But once the film got out on the offense and some of the adjustments they'd made, they struggled a little more, especially in clutch situations. So the question for Pittsburgh this year is very, very simple. Can Pittsburgh take that next step forward in a close game where they were not good last year and win with throwing the ball? Something that Narduzzi probably hates saying out loud. It's like a 4-letter word to him. I mean, he's 1953 old school. I'm sorry, he just is. But they started to do it a little more last year, and they also did it a little bit on the back end, but not enough. And then turnovers, like just untimely penalties, they shot themselves in the foot in those back 7 games. So can Pittsburgh be a 9-win team this year? Would it surprise me? No. They're the team that nobody wants to play. But at the same time, if you think about media, you, me, anybody else, who's really going to pick Pittsburgh in the top 5 of the ACC? How many people do you think will vote Pittsburgh even top 6? They're one of the hardest teams to predict. Like 6 games, then 7 games in 2 different directions. Like that's hard. So we don't really know what we're going to get. And Pittsburgh just plays a traditional ACC schedule. I don't know what their over-under is at FanDuel, but I'd guess 6.5, 7, something like that would be my projection. This is a team that returning starting quarterback, maybe a couple of the kids they had transfer in will be bigger impact. That stuff makes it really hard too, the transfer portal. How well does a team assemble and become congruent? I mean, we talk about that when I join you for Locked On Canes or you join me for Locked On Seminoles. That stuff's hard. And I'm not saying that they don't have the right coaching staff to help make that happen because it sure looks like they figured it out last year, then they fell off a cliff. So it can go sideways. I don't know. Maybe some of their NIL, by the way, with the recruiting is improved, and maybe that'll help some of the congruency this year. There's a lot of question marks, but that is a team that I would put an asterisk by in the ACC rankings because they could go a lot of different directions. That might be the biggest fly in the ointment for anybody picking their order of finish.
Yeah, we'll talk more about NIL because the way NIL happens, it's still going to be a thing, but the House settlement changes everything, including who's going to be getting the checks from here on out. And I also want to talk a little Florida State because, as there's positive Pittsburgh recruiting momentum, it's not been as positive for FSU, although they did just land a commitment recently. And Miami's had like all the biggest stars visiting the past couple weekends, but haven't gotten a verbal commitment out of it yet. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. We're only getting started on FanDuel. Folks, the NBA playoffs and the Stanley Cup finals, NBA finals, Stanley Cup finals, we're in the finals everywhere. It's in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. Folks, FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. You can head to FanDuel.com right now and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch. For your next listen, make sure you check out our other shows. We got Kenton Gibbs in the building, who is the awesome host of Locked On Wolfpack. And I thank Kenton for holding it down for me as I was somewhere in France eating croissants last week. And I was too big time to join my own show last week. So thanks, KG, for holding it down. So make sure you check out Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On Canes. And Kenton, I guess you got some good news on Friday with the House versus NCAA settlement getting approved. I'm hoping you get a nice fat check because you played during the era of back pay. Am I right?
You and me both, man. I'm right up against it because I had a medical retirement situation. So I'm gonna put in some calls to see, like, hey, I played in 2016. What's going on? Do I need to get a check cut or what's up? But no, in all seriousness, this house settlement. There's a ton of details to get to, and I'm glad we got our recruiting ace, Brian Smith, to talk about.
Yeah, and Brian, I know Kenton and I both want to know, how do you see this affecting the ACC? Because when we talk about the revenue sharing, it's like the $20.5 million. That's not the minimum. That's the ceiling, right? So, I mean, are all the ACC programs going to have $20.5 million to share with their athletes every year? Does that put the ACC at a disadvantage compared to the SEC and the Big Ten?
I'm curious what Ken would probably know best about this, but do we really think Wake Forest?
No.
I'm just going to throw out 3 schools here, and you tell me what you think. Wake Forest.
No, absolutely.
Virginia, like football for Virginia, it's that's iffy. That's a tough
possibly one. Yeah, I think they might be.
It's a state school. It's bigger. Wake Forest, I don't feel very good about. And then if you really want to look at like Boston College, like I'm not sure about that one either. So, it's rough. If you have a really good basketball, like Virginia's got basketball, like you're late with that been as good, but they won a national title. They've been really good. So there's a little bit of a different look at that. But Wake Forest, like their NIL, and I'm not trying to be mean, is not good. Right. So they could be the bottom dragger in this league moving forward. I mean, their head coach left, didn't want to deal with it and all this stuff, and they didn't have a lot of NIL anyway. So I think that the 20.5 could be detrimental to a few teams. However, Clemson, Miami, Florida State, I mean, from what we've heard with Kenton's least favorite school in Chapel Hill, they've got NIL now. Yeah. NC State's the one that's right there in the middle that I'm curious about. I haven't heard much about that. I'll let Kenton speak to that. But those schools should all hit that every year. And then in addition, their collectives should pick up. And there's a lot, I'll get into the due diligence, how this works. It becomes a ridiculous bureaucracy. I know everybody's shocked with that with government, but those entities will have the opportunity to give guys and gals their own endorsements on the side as well. They just got to go through the clearing. It's annoying, but they should have plenty. Those programs I'm not worried about. Duke's another one that's interesting because they've committed to football allegedly. I don't know where that's going. That's long term, but obviously basketball is Duke basketball. Virginia Tech, we'll see. Not Georgia Tech. I need to see more. Like Georgia Tech should be a recruiting machine. It's in Atlanta, and it never is. So I don't think their NIL is that great. So we'll see. But Syracuse is the other one. Haven't heard great things from Jackson Holzer about Syracuse NIL, but I've heard it's gotten a little better. Mm-hmm. But because that's a basketball school, for football purposes, I wonder how that's going to work. That could be an interesting dynamic because they've got a real coach. So they haven't been good at football in quite a while. So maybe this will change around and some of their donors will pony up a little bit.
So we talked about the team aspect of it and how it affects the team, but let's talk about the individual for a second here. Let's talk about the players. One of the lesser discussed parts of this is that the NIL aspect is supposed to be reduced to, hey, you can only get fair market pay for whatever your services are, whatever service these athletes are providing. Is that something that you see sticking here? Is that something that you're like, oh, we're one lawsuit away, and that lawsuit's probably going to be filed today. We're recording this on the 9th. That lawsuit will be here on about the 10th. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I decided to take the smart route and ask a few of my lawyer buddies about this, and I got different answers. The consensus was for a very short time, this will settle as people try to figure out how to attack it. But the problem is the words that the people in the NCAA and athletic directors loathe like four words, and that is employees. We got to make them employees. There's no collective bargaining unless they're employees. But what happens when they're employees? Benefits. That is a 4-letter word to these people. They're stuck because like MLB, NFL, soccer, anything, they're employees. They get benefits. Like Kenton, like he had a medical when he retired. There's benefits from that stuff when you get into the whole legal aspect. If you're a pro player, like, can you imagine what an NFL, baseball, or anybody like that plays pro? I man, if they got something that happens down the line because they don't want to get sued, they'll take care of that stuff. They might have to fill out some papers. They're taking care of them. They're trying to avoid it. They're not saying it, but they don't want to deal with any of that. That's what the problem is here. So Kenton is right. There will be lawsuits, but I was told that because of this, there are different entities that can and do judge how much somebody's worth is. But we're talking about teenagers, which that makes it even harder because this isn't a 26-year-old that's in his second contract out of MLB making $25 million a year. It's a different kind of deal. And secondarily, if the local car dealership wants you to do 10 ads, who's to say that what they're going to pay isn't value to them? It's just
right.
So I think Kenton's point is right. And this is where it gets murky. For those that don't know, any deal, this is hilarious, that is over $600 has to go through the clearinghouse if it's part of your collective. Well, every deal is over $600. How are they going to have the manpower to do that? The slowness of it, to Kenton's point, like that's going to make this really annoying. Really annoying. So I don't know how they're going to do this because these kids got to make timely decisions. And in my experience, this stuff is not quick at all. That does not work. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, and they're going to try to get away from this and say it's not. There's just going to be a bunch of cash payments again because they're not going to wait on that. That's coming because they're not going to wait on this clearinghouse, especially like we just talked about. Pittsburgh had 10 commitments. Well, some of those kids got deals. They got to get cleared now, and that's fine. But do you really think these kids are going to wait? Because the spots are getting filled up at other schools. If I don't get this deal here, it doesn't work out. Well, the other 3 schools I'm looking at, that's not how this works. So the clearinghouse has a disastrous problem during specific times of year too. And right now is commitment season. And they're just getting ready to start at July 1st. Well, some of these kids are committing between July 1st and July 10th. Timing is awful because nothing starts fast. They're not going to be churning out, oh, that's check mark, that's an X. That's not how it works. You got hundreds and hundreds of athletes just in football. That doesn't count soccer and all the other stuff. Good luck. I said we hire Kenton to be the guy that supervises how fast they do this stuff and see how that goes.
Well, for a nominal fee, I'll be checking off lots of checks. I'll be approving lots of checks for sure.
I'm expecting more antitrust lawsuits because just to me, the idea of trying to define what fair market value is, it sounds very un-American. Like we're in a free market.
Capitalism, baby.
I always learned growing up that market value is what somebody is willing to pay you. Like that's how you define what someone's value is. So then, I mean, what's to say, because if a certain student athlete, we still call them that, is more marketable than another, like, well, what's to say that the quarterback shouldn't be getting, a deal 10 times higher than, a backup offensive lineman? And how do they define that? And how do you go about defining that without collective bargaining? So I feel like, maybe a few problems have been solved with this. And I think the point that gets buried a little bit too much because people tend to focus on the negatives more than the positives. I think the positive of the $2.8 billion in back pay that's going out to hopefully Kenton and others, I think that's a positive that should not be overlooked here. But I also feel like this settlement, it tries to solve every problem with one settlement. And I don't think there's a way to do that without creating 100 more problems. It's like the Hydra. You cut off one head and then 2 new heads emerge.
Yeah, most definitely. So let me ask you this on the recruiting front, Brian. We talked about schools that we think will do well, schools that, won't do well and all that. But I want to focus on the players just one more time here. Is there any position group that you see getting a big pay bump potentially as a result of the House settlement being approved? And any position group where you say, hey, they're making big bucks now, but you better snatch and grab it while you can as a result of this 20.5 being labeled as the cap you can pay for a team?
You're going to like this a lot, Kenton. It's going to be the big guys because in the last couple of portal cycles, what have we talked about on this show and others? How many offensive linemen in particular, the guys you used to battle, get in the portal that are good, not the guys that ain't playing? It's a low number. So the guys that are on rosters already, look, if you want to keep it that way, how good? Think about this. The guys you battled when you were at NC State, when your left tackle was hurt and the second string guy came in, was the O-line the same?
No, man. There's a whole different ball game.
That's what I'm saying. So those guys will get paid. And then the easy low-hanging fruit answer in certain situations, like if your quarterback leaves, it's one thing, you're not going to be as good. But the political structure of that, we know what your booster, like the phone calls to the AD from your top boosters, he doesn't even want to look at his screen on his phone because he's afraid of what do you mean we lost our quarterback? I already donated this. So the quarterback position, because if you don't have that, you're done. I think they're going to get paid too. I'm curious on some of the other spots, but linemen on both sides of the ball, you got to have it. And quarterback, yeah, I think they're going to do very, very well.
So what I'm hearing is Cristobal needs to save up a few more ducats in Coral Gables if he wants to keep that big man machine moving.
Well, I mean, I got to give Miami some credit. They've got plenty of linemen. Now they got to go win some games.
For sure.
They're not short in the trenches. They're not short in the trenches.
I have been told that they need to go and win some games. I only get that comment 100 times on every Locked On Canes episode that I do. I'd like to know what your comment section, Brian, looks like in Locked On Seminoles. I mean, when Keyshawn Henderson canceled that OV, shut down his recruitment, choosing Houston over Florida State. Now, I understand Florida State has had a recruiting win since, but how are things going on the trail for Mr. Norvell?
They did get Whitley Cadeau, my guy that Kenton will love, 6'5", 295, can play nose guard yesterday out of Booker T. Washington in Atlanta. They found an under-the-radar guy that I loved his film. I didn't even know who he was. They brought him in for a visit, and I'm like, okay, this kid can play, and he's got all the measurables you're looking for. DQ Forkpa, linebacker from IMG, had a great visit. I think they're going to get him. He's a guy that's 6 foot 232. Looks like he's a professional heavyweight boxer. He is one of the most yoked human beings I've ever seen in my life. There's a few other guys that had on visits this weekend, but here is the key question. Florida State has done an incredible job, of getting the recruits to campus. Who's going to commit now? And who's going to stay committed? Out of the guys that they had committed before Cadeau committed, they had 9 guys committed, which is a solid start. But 7 of the 9 had planned to take OVs to other schools. That is the definition of not committed by me. Now, Kenton or Alex want to comment on that? You go right ahead, but I'll go in on my own opinion on this one. That's not committed. Okay, if you guys want to go another direction, fire away. But the kids don't see this as a viable program until they see it on the field. The problem is all the visits happen in May and June, and by mid-July, they're all committed. Yeah. It's a problem. And the other thing, even though Florida's in the same boat, their other arch rival, they're rolling in recruiting now all of a sudden. Yeah. If Florida starts doing really well and Florida State doesn't pick commitments up, that is not good for Norvell and his staff. Like, again, this is all political. Fans not only want to see their team win, sometimes it's kind of gross in a way, but they're more happy to see their rival lose. Now, Kenton might speak to that too, but that's another story. So Florida starts doing well. Miami's recruiting better than Florida State. So the Noles are in on everybody. I need to see them get over the top, though. Like, I'm hearing all these good comments from a bunch of different guys, but when are they going to pop? And are they going to back it up by, okay, I'm committed, I'm not taking other visits? Like, there's a lot to this. Florida State recruiting is fascinating. Some of their fans are nervous, and so am I as the Locked On Seminoles host, because this is a do or die situation, because you can't fall further behind your rivals in recruit. You just can't. And we're at that point. The rubber meets the road right now.
You're absolutely right there, Brian. 17-year-olds, they change like the wind blows. That's just kind of the nature of this thing. And then you talk about taking other official visits. I can tell you right now, there were certain situations I had going on at home where I had to tell coaches, listen, I love your school and all that. I got to go and see these other places. I got to, get the cookie cake and enjoy all the free food and all the good things for this weekend. I got to go and enjoy that. So that absolutely is a portion of it. But you're right. If you're committed and especially now that they're paying kids for visits and whatnot, oh, baby, this is different territory than what I was in, okay? If I'm getting paid, hey, to hell with the cookie cake from Illinois. I'm at NC State and I'm happy to be here. So no, I get you 1,000%. Let me ask you this: in terms of Florida State's recruiting and some of the battles that they've had recently, I know that you talked about your opponent losing sometimes is important. Miami locks up Campbell; he shuts down his commitment. Like you said, Florida is rolling, in terms of their recruiting. Is this a pivotal season for Florida State in general to say, hey, this is where the rubber meets the road for you wanting to go to one of the big two conferences, if that is going to happen soon?
I think so, because if they go, let's say they go 5-7, let's just throw a number out there, and they can't even make a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Look, they're a major brand. They're really good at baseball. They're really good. And sometimes in basketball, they've had their seasons and all that. But football is the engine for that school. Like for Donno, for Miami, it's the same. It's why those schools are big rivals, and it brings in the dollars. And they just invested $1 gazillion in Doak Campbell and all that. Is the Big Ten as likely to scoop them up? I think it's the Big Ten, but that's another rabbit hole to go down to another day. But if you suck, you don't have as much leverage when you go in. Like, do you get the same equity that everybody else does? Or is it kind of like the deal with the SMU or something like you need full boat? That's why you're in this situation to begin with. So yes, and secondarily, I could be wrong on the exact math here, but it's about $50 million that they would owe Norvell, a little, maybe slightly less. So if they're not firing him after this year, barring them going like 2 or 3 wins. They can't do it. Financially, they can't do it. So that means you would be dragging him into the 26th season. How do you think recruiting is going to go next summer if you're coming off like a 5-win season? Yeah. Then the next head coach is in a super hole. Are you going to be able to get the coach you win? The coach you want? I mean, this is pivotal. If they could just win 7 games, it'd be okay. But they need to win 8 or 9 to kind of get their mojo back and gain full credibility. And I need to see it. I mean, they won 2 games last year. I'm in the I got to see it with my own eyes category. You guys can speak for yourselves as well. But if they don't, I think that really could hurt them. They can't have another catastrophe. Cannot happen.
Well, I think Kenton and I should dive a little bit deeper on that when we come back. But a huge thank you and shout out to Brian Smith, who works double time here on the network, as Kenton and I both do as well. You can catch Brian on the portal. Follow him on X at LO_the portal, and check him out on Locked On Seminoles, and follow his personal X account at FBScout_Florida. Brian, thank you so much for the time.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So coming up next, what is the floor of wins for Florida State? We will table the top ACC rivalries for a future episode because I want to dive a little bit. It's a lot of meat on the bone with that one. But we're not done yet. You want to keep it locked right here on Locked On ACC. And, Kenton, I know depending on who you talk to that covers or follows Florida State, you get a kind of a wide range of feelings heading into this upcoming season. And I noticed, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but a lot of Florida State folks are a little bit bullish on this upcoming year. And I would say Vegas is kind of bullish as well, and FanDuel.com, because their over-under is 7.5 wins. Which would mean, 8 wins or 7 wins, you fall right one of those numbers coming off a 2-win season. If you win 8 games this year, that's a dramatic improvement. Some Florida State folks feel like they can compete for an ACC championship this year. So not everyone is pessimistic heading into the season. So what do you think the number is? Mike Norvell has to win X number of games to keep his job next year, or at least stay off the hot seat.
I think Mike Norvell, from the financial aspect that Smitty talked about, Mike Norvell has to win at least 4 to keep his job. I think anything under 4, you're cooked. I think really with 4, you could be cooked as well. But I think that's like the minimum that they would even consider bringing him back, because 3 or lower, you can't. There's no way. I don't care how you cut it, how you slice it. You're at Florida State. You cannot have 2 seasons through which your win total is 5. You cannot do that under any circumstance. But now, when you look at this schedule, you talk about, people are very bullish on this team. I'm sorry to tell you, I feel like that's a lot of name recognition. I really and truly do. I'm not saying that this team is going to be horrible, but I think that they have a pretty decent schedule ahead of them. Because when I look at this schedule, I see a few games off the rip that are going to be tough. And not only that they're going to be tough, it's where they're positioned. That first game against Alabama, listen, this ain't Nick Saban's Alabama. This is not. However, I think that Alabama is that much better than Florida State to where game one could decimate that team for the future to where they're stuck looking up like, well, damn, maybe we aren't a serious outfit. So I see a potential floor for this team of 4 to 5 wins. I really do. I see a ceiling for this team. I think ceiling, I still don't see a world where they get 8, but maybe 8 in terms of regular season. But with a bowl game, I could see them getting an 8 and 5. I can see it happening. With a bowl game, they end up in the right situation. I can see them winning 8. But this regular season schedule, I just think it's as much as we talk about, oh, well, it's only 1 or 2 out of conference games that are tough. That's tougher than everybody else. I'll give you East Texas A&M. I'll give you Kent State. I'm not sure I want to give you Virginia, but I'll give you that one. Pitt, I can't give you that one. Miami, can't give you that one. Stanford, I'll give you that one. You're up to 4. Wake Forest, I give you that one. That's 5. I can't give you Clemson, can't give you Virginia Tech, can't give you NC State, can't give you Florida. I can't give you any of those. So, mind you, some of those teams I said I'll give you and I'll grant that, we don't know what they could be or what their product could look like. So honestly and truly, I see a floor of 3, 4, a ceiling of 7 to 8.
Yeah, and I think I think the number that would get him fired, I think, would be 4 wins or less. Like I don't, I know again, I know it'd be very expensive, a $50 million buyout, which maybe they could negotiate that down a little bit. Just say maybe Norvell would be so ashamed that they would be able to negotiate that down a bit. But yeah, I think it would be too loud from the boosters. Like you couldn't bring him back after 4 wins. 5 wins may be enough to keep the job, but the fan base would be so pissed if they only win 5 games. It would be really awkward. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm not even sure what the floor is, to be honest. I mean, maybe the floor is 3 or 4 wins. The ceiling, I mean, maybe if certain things break correctly. I mean, I'm the Miami guy, but obviously, Miami at times has struggled against Florida State, even going up to Florida State. The game's in Tallahassee this year, so I'm not going to say that's a guaranteed win for either program. But if that one breaks in Florida State's favor, they have maybe a shot at 8 wins. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Next time I want to dive a little bit deeper into the House settlement with KG, and also want to talk about top ACC rivalries, and not just rivalry games that the ACC is involved in, like Clemson versus South Carolina or the backyard brawl with Pittsburgh and West Virginia, but straight up ACC versus ACC. What are the top rivalry games in this conference? We want to get to that and so much more next time on another episode of Locked On ACC. In the meantime, make sure you follow Kenton at Locked On Wolfpack and TGIF_Kenton on X. Follow me on the Locked On Kane Show and at Alex Donno on X. Make sure you smash the like button, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On ACC. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
NCAA, call me up if you need an NIL talk.